and gentlemen, welcome to violence. The word and the act, encased and contained within the supple skin of woman.
Johnny! Let's just time Lancelot as he comes charging to the rescue.
What's going on here?
3.5 seconds, champ. You were great.
What's the matter?
The watch. She won't give it back to me.
Let's have it.
You've got a weird sense of humor.
Try again. I get funnier.
And welcome to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. My name is Jesse, and I'll be your host. Before we get started, please make sure you subscribe to the show on your podcatcher of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to give the show 5 stars and a 1 to 2 sentence review, and tell me what you think. If you'd like to follow the show on social media, you can do so on Instagram at Cult Cinema Circle, or on Twitter at Cult Cinecircle, or you can send me an email at cultcinemacircle@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Letterboxd at Jesse Kremp, JESSEKREMP, all one word, and all social media links will be put in the show notes. Now on with the show. So on today's episode, we are going to be talking about a little film. We're going back in the back, everybody. We are going back to 1965, and we're going to be talking about, I guess, one of the ultimate cult movies, if you will, one that started a lot of different films that came after it, but this one is particularly special. It is Faster Pussycat Kill Kill from 1965. But you know what? I couldn't do this all on my own. Oh, no. I had to bring someone on with me to be able to talk about this and to also give us a little bit of a history lesson of this movie and the director and all that good stuff. And he's also just a fun dude to, listen to and talk to. But you know him for being one of the writers on Rue Morgue magazine. He's also one of the executive producers of In Search of Darkness Part 3, which chronicled a whole lot of home video horror movies from the 80s. And he's also one of the co-hosts of the Lady Killers podcast on the Bloody Disgusting podcast network. But please welcome to my show, the one, the only, Rocco T. Thompson. Hi, Rocco. How are you?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Violence.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me.
So happy to hear you and see you. Yeah, we're just chit-chatting on, life in general, like before we started recording. But yeah, this is the beginning of November. I like when you told me, like, hey, would you do Faster Pussycat? And I said, oh yeah, sure. You said because those girls ate. And I was like, oh yeah, sure. That's a lot of like Thanksgiving imagery, I guess. Fucks Thanksgiving in general anyway.
Yeah, but... and I mean, they have a really extended lunch scene.
Yes, they do. So
it makes sense. There's fried chicken involved.
Exactly. It reminds you all about Thanksgiving and being with your family, I guess. But welcome, Rocco. It's nice to see you and to hear you and everything. But what I want to know from you a little bit, I want to know, like, what this movie, like, definitely I was going to do it on the show. Once you suggested it, I was like, oh yeah, I should do that with you. But I want to know, like, what is your history with this movie? When did you first see it and become familiar with it? And what is it about it that made you want to, maybe come on and talk to, a homosexual like me about this film?
Sure. When I saw this on the list, I was super excited because, on the Lady Killers, we do cover films about female killers. This is one that is actually one of the audio drops for one of the sections, which I personally stuck in there that you hear every episode. But we try to cover things that are a little more broadly available, and Russ Meyer's stuff has sort of been out of circulation for a while. I'm sure we can talk about that a bit later. So I was stoked to talk about this. My personal history with this movie and Russ Meyer, when I was in high school, as a burgeoning cinephile, I picked up Best Movies of the 70s by Jürgen Muller. It's a Taschen book. It has Liza Minnelli and Cabaret on the cover, and that was the first I had ever heard about him. Actually, going back a little bit, it is entirely possible that I did hear the title Faster Pussycat Kill Kill during the release of Grindhouse, the Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez double feature, because, Quentin was heavily influenced by Faster Pussycat Kill Kill and Russ Meyer for his half, Death Proof, which we've covered on The Lady Killers. But yeah, I remember reading Best Movies of the 70s by Jürgen Muller, and they mentioned Super Vixens as one of the best movies of the 70s, and the write-up was so insane. So I did some looking up, some Googling. I picked up Faster Pussycat, the DVD first. It was in what you will, the DVDs are like really ugly covers. Back then, they were the Bozomania collection was the best way to get them directly from the Russ Meyer estate themselves. And it was just everything I wanted. It is the ultimate cult movie, like you said.
Yeah.
And I have been in a love affair with him ever since. I read Big Bosoms and Square Jaws by Jimmy McDonough soon after that, who's a fantastic biographer. He also wrote The Ghastly One about Andy Milligan, one of my other favorite cult filmmakers, which we do not have time to get into, and nobody likes him anyway. So and I slowly collected all of those DVDs throughout high school. And yeah, he's one of the filmmakers that it was initially started my love of cult cinema, basically, along with John Waters, who also was a big fan of Russ Meyer.
Totally. Yeah, I think for me, at least, like, I'd love hearing all that for you. But I think for me, like, I had only ever known this movie as like this is like so funny because you guys just covered it on the show, but like, I always heard this like in conversation with something like Jawbreaker, right? Which makes a lot of sense because actually, friends of the show, Movies That Made Us Gay, did an episode on this movie with Darren Stein, the director of Jawbreaker, and he is quoted as saying on that show that really, if it wasn't for something like Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, there would not be a Jawbreaker, which makes complete sense to me. Yes, because it's like but I was like, well, what the hell do you mean by that? Like, huh? But then also being like a John Waters fan, like, you are as well, also living in the land of John Waters too, but like, remembering that like he also is somebody who loves this like director as well. Also, we'll get to it at some point on the show, but Beyond the Valley of the Dolls is also one of his films. It's very well known, very cult.
Perfection.
Of course. And like, it's just one of these things where I was like, well, what is this movie? What it's even about? Or like, who is this? So I decided, this is the first time I ever watched it. I will say off the top. Yeah. Off the top, you can find this on YouTube streaming somewhere. So go look for it. Because other than that, you're not going to be able to find it anywhere cheap, probably. I don't know. You might be lucky and find a DVD online, but you might have to pay for it, which is kind of unfortunate. But
yeah, well, the nice thing also, and another reason I was really excited to talk about this now is for Russ Meyer fans, we were all so fucking stoked because Severin Films just got access to the Russ Meyer estate collection.
Nice.
Like I said, they've been putting them out since he died in 2004 themselves in like really standard crappy DVD editions, not giving them the love they deserve. But Severin has announced that they're putting out his Vixen trilogy. So Vixen, Super Vixens, and Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens in new restorations. And it now is the best time to discover Russ Meyer, and hopefully Faster Pussycat Kill Kill is coming next.
Right. I would hope so too. But yeah, I mean, like, this was, the first time watch for me, at least. And I gotta say, I really did enjoy this. I think this movie is, it took me a minute to watch it because I got like halfway through or like a 30 minutes way through. And I was like, okay. But when I actually sat down and watched it for this pod, like, I really did, like, I just saw like how silly and fun this is. This is both a like strong female story. It's a transgressive story. Some could argue it's also a so bad it's good movie, like, which is, sort of fair, but like, I don't know. There's just it's every woman, really, honestly, at this point, which is kind of what the best cult movies kind of are sometimes, really. Yeah, but I just think like this is a fascinating one, and I know I wanted to talk about it. But yeah, we'll get into a little bit about the figures of this film and just chop it up about this. I know you have a good amount of, because you have all this like kind of research or this whole sort of like fascination with this director. I'm sure you can also fill us in about like this guy as well, because again,
absolutely,
something with that. And we'll also talk about some of the themes being explored in this movie and all this. But I'm excited to be able to talk about it. But let's set the stage, Rocco. Let's set this as well. I also shout out, I will say, I did love the In Search of Darkness Part 3. So good job on helping produce that, apparently.
Thank you. I did.
That.
I've parted ways with them, but I have In Search of Darkness Part 3. I conducted 30 multiple hour on camera interviews for that one with various talent, and it was one of the coolest times of my life.
I love that for you. I love that because anybody who hasn't watched In Search of Darkness at all, check it out on Shudder, or you can get the stuff from their website. But it's literally a kind of collection of different horror movies through the 1980s and people who were involved talking about it. They're documentaries similar to I guess something like, it's not the same as like Crystal Lake Memories or even Never Sleep Again, which chronicled the Friday the 13th series and Nightmare on Elm Street series, but this is more kind of a catch-all, and it's really cool. And being able to like but In Search of Darkness Part 3 particularly really hones in on the home video market, which is really cool.
Yeah, and in a weird full circle moment, I actually got to Tracy Toms, who is in Death Proof, is a big fan of horror movies, so I got to interview her about some of her favorite horror movies from the 80s. So as a Russ Meyer fan and a Tarantino apologist, it was great.
Oh no, totally. She's also a DMV girl after my own heart, even though she's in that horrible Rent movie, but honestly I don't care because she's also really cool.
She was my original Joanne. I can't say otherwise.
I know, right?
Along with Rosario.
Oh, seriously, literally. And they're both in fucking
her Death Proof sister.
So funny. Like, that's so funny. Yeah. Also, like, but yeah, it definitely talks about like, but there's also like a really interesting like Asian cinema part of that where they talk about Hong Kong movies. I also love it's really funny because people forget about these movies sometimes, but like Catherine Wilhoit, who's Pepper Ann, she was also a part of that series.
Yes,
I think.
And that's one I pressed for us to talk to because she I think she had such a really interesting little, she worked on a couple really interesting movies back in the 80s.
Yes.
And she's kind of underrated, and my partner really liked that because she's also in Gilmore Girls.
Yes, and also Gilmore Girls.
That's my partner's not really starstruck by most of the people I speak to, but I have collected a couple Gilmore Girls former cast members like Scout Taylor Compton and others, and he's really, impressed with that usually. So
Scout Taylor Compton currently is in Baltimore for Monster Mania because we're recording right in the beginning of October. So
nice.
Her and Danielle Harris are here. I'm not going to that though, but damn it, they're here. It's cute, but yeah, I like her. Go check out, for anybody, Kathleen Wilhoit in Witchboard, of course, which is not a great Kevin Tenney movie, but she's great in it. And then also Dream Demon.
Yeah, she's fabulous in Dream Demon, and no one has seen that. But one of my personal favorite of the interviews that was just kind of fun for me as a movie nerd was speaking to Kate McNeil. Who's in one of my top 5 slashers, very underrated, The House on Sorority Row.
Yes, she's the main girl in it.
Yes, fantastic. And then also Monkey Shines from one of my main guys, George Romero. Yeah, and she was that was one just personally that really felt really special to me, and I sort of fangirled over, and she was just sort of taken aback that I was really so effusively full of praise about these movies, as a lot of these cult actors who are in these cult films are. But yeah,
also
cool
fun little fact too. We'll get off of In Search of Darkness. This is just plugging it because I really do think it's worth a watch. Actually, fun little fact though. House on Sorority Row. I used to work at a hospital right near the Preakness racetrack or whatever.
Okay.
And literally right around there in Pikesville, Maryland, that is where Sorority Row, or the House on Sorority Row, was shot back in the 80s.
I love that.
By Mark Rossman. So like, I think the house got turned into condos. I'm sorry to say, Rocco.
What a shame.
I know, but
In my mind, Eric is still in the attic.
I know. I guess I know who's going to come back for my. We did Sorority Row already with my buddy Pickens. I guess I might know who's coming back for House on Sorority Row.
Wait, you did? Did you do the remake?
We did the remake. Me and Pickens.
Okay,
did,
yeah.
we love
Fuck
that trash.
Fuck that bullshit. Okay, I'm definitely in to talk the first one.
Oh no, we love that trash. First off, but it's trash. Like it's not good. But Carrie Fisher with a shotgun, bitch, it sends me.
My co-host on the Lady Killers, May Schultz, said that she's not used to watching House on Sorority Row. She watched it again recently. Right. She said she's not used to watching it without a riff track, and I was fucking insulted.
I kind of get that though, but honestly, like, yeah, no, I watched that. It was a fun time. The one for me is Reefer Madness. I'd need to watch that with a riff track or something like that, because if you don't, it's horrible. But
yeah, you're not really missing anything, man.
Not really much, right?
But Sorority Row deserves your full attention and respect.
That it does. Anyway, but let's set the scene a little bit though of 1965 in film. So here are some of the top grossing films that were happening at 1965. Again, this is a different time in our history. We have Von Ryan's Express. I have no idea what the hell that is at number 10. Shenandoah from Universal at number 9. What's New Pussycat, which is one of the Woody Allen movies, I guess. It was also his film debut, apparently.
And this title was a takeoff on that, obviously.
Yes, of course. Cat Ballou from Columbia was at number 7. That Darn Cat, which is that a cartoon or no?
I think it's a live action movie, but it's funny. There's a lot of cat content in this decade.
We liked cats, and there's also a cat in this movie. The Great Race for number 5 from Warner Brothers. Those Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines was at number 4 all together in the year. Thunderball from UA, United Artists, rest in peace. Dr. Zhivago, which I have no idea what the hell that is, but that was at number 2 for the year from MGM. And do you want to take a guess at what was at number 1, Rocco, by any chance?
I couldn't tell you.
So it's our wonderful Queen of Genovia in one of her very well-known roles, The Sound of Music from 20th Century Fox.
Oh, obviously.
Of course.
Like the polar opposite of Faster Pussycat Kill Kill.
100%. But yeah, so that was our top 10 of what was big at the box office at this time. But at the same time, though, in this year, we had a lot of these William Asher teen beach movies coming out as well. Mm-hmm. Of course, that started off with Gidget from 1959, which is a fantastic movie, but you then also have a lot more of these movies coming out because AIP was just trying their damnedest to get kids, teenagers really, to come to the theater and spend that money. And also movies like I Saw What You Did, which had, who was that? It was Joan Crawford or Betty Davis or one of them?
That is Joan Crawford in a William Castle joint.
Yes. So that came out and that became a cult favorite, of course, as well. Do you also want to hear some of the film debuts that happened this year? People who made their film debut.
Absolutely. Of course I do.
We have, of course, I said Woody Allen. Blah, he was in What's New Pussycat, but also Ian Abercrombie. He was also in Von Ryan's Express. He's like a character actor guy. Is he dead now? I don't remember. He might be. Perhaps, but people would know him. Ian Abercrombie. Jacqueline Bisset did The Knack and How to Get It. So I don't know what Jacqueline Bisset really has been in, but I've heard the name, so I'm like, okay, cool, I guess. And also Paul Benedict was in the double-barreled detective story. Again, apparently he's like a actor guy. He's a Wikipedia page. Somebody who recently passed away this year or last year was Dabney Coleman. I'll always remember him from, of course, 9 to 5. He's also the president in My Date with the President's Daughter, which was on ABC back in the day.
Oh my God.
Friedle. But yeah, Dabney
Cloak
Coleman.
And Dagger. Yeah. Cloak and Dagger is peak
Yes.
Dabney Coleman for me.
Yes, he did The Slender Thread. A little man by the name of Robert De Niro, who would end up being in Taxi Driver years later, he started his career with 3 Rooms in Manhattan. So he did that as well. A cult favorite of ours here. She's known as Topanga's aunt on Boy Meets World, but also she's Jess from Black Christmas. Olivia Hussey made her film debut in the Battle of the Villa Fiorita, I guess. This is right before probably she was in Romeo and Juliet, which is what a lot of people
what is it Romeo and Juliet? Just
yeah.
The preeminent love story of all time.
But it was one of the first big film adaptations that they had.
Yeah.
So that
Love
was
that. Problematic stuff behind the scenes with that movie, but I still really adore it and think she's the best Juliet ever.
I'm sure. Yeah, I haven't seen it. That would be the one that you would show in school. I feel like, for sure. If you were to do that, future Oscar winner and youngest male Oscar winner, Timothy Hutton made his film debut in a movie called Never Too Late. So of course he'd go on to win for Ordinary People and be in all sorts of movies from there. But he started in 1965, probably as a little kid. And of course, he has since passed away, but I love this man as being one of the really wonderful parts of the Return of the Living Dead, James Karen, who he is, I don't remember his name. Was he Bert? I think his name is.
Oh God, I'm not
it's
sure.
So good. It's so good.
I'm sorry. I'm distracted. I'm distracted by my 80s horror husband, Tom Matthews, in both of those movies.
I get it. I understand.
I don't have time for James Karen. Sorry.
Oh, he's so good though. But he was in Frankenstein.
Good. No disrespect to him. R.I.P.
I know. Frankenstein meets the space monster. He was in that. This film includes the film debut of one Stuart Lancaster, who plays the dirty old man. He also really made his film debut in Mudhoney, which is another Rissmeyer movie, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But he also was in this same year. The only Miss, she was in both The Graduate and Stepford Wives. I love her in the Stepford Wives, though. Catherine Ross was in Shenandoah, which was the 9th most highest grossing movie of this year. And also that crotchety old man from Good Burger himself, Abe Vigoda, also was in 3 Rooms in Manhattan with Robert De Niro. So that was a little something. So when you think about these people who either were young starting or have maybe since passed away, it's really interesting to look at 1965 and kind of see what was going on at this time. Do you have anything else to kind of talk about in terms of what was happening in film around this time? Or we can also just maybe go into a little bit more about Russ Meyer as a person. But do you have anything to kind of add to just kind of what the landscape was looking like this year, really?
Sure. I don't have a ton to say. I do think this is such an interesting transitional time. Like, it's not quite new Hollywood yet.
Correct.
I like that you brought up that Thunderball is in there. That's my favorite franchise ever, if those who don't know, is James Bond. I'm obsessed with those movies. And it is funny because Faster Pussycat Kill Kill was a major flop. One of the big things is that it was in black and white. All the movies that you mentioned are not in black and white.
Correct.
So black and white was kind of passé at this point, but obviously he did what he did with this one to save money. And it's just sort of interesting perched here as it is because it's at, it's right at the start of the nascent sexual revolution, and it's how it's reflected in cinema, which is sort of completely marginal to what those big budget top 10 films you're talking about were tackling at this time.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and we can't overstate Russ Meyer directed 2 movies that were one big studio one, and for 20th Century Fox, but he made something like he made 23 theatrical features, and all the rest were independently made and self-financed. So he's a little bit insulated in his own world, both stylistically, in his own world, stylistically, thematically, and just commercially, from the rest of filmmaking at this time, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I'm glad that you kind of talked about, how this was right before New Hollywood that would really come, as part of, I just watched it last month, I think, but Midnight Cowboy, which is a really good movie, barring John Voight being a weirdo, but him in there, and also him and, Dustin Hoffman. I mean, that really kind of started off. It was one of the big start-offs of that New Hollywood movement. But it's interesting how that comes at the end of the year. And plus also getting into, we'll talk more about it probably when we ever cover Valley of the Dolls at some point. But it's also interesting to talk about the 60s, where this is like right around, like, I don't know. It's a weird time because like you have like civil rights is still kind of like not happening a ton, really. And, everything just looks different now. I mean, this is set in California. California looks different now, completely in terms of economy and just who lives there and all that shit. So it's really interesting to kind of look at this and just see like where Russ Meyer kind of fits into this. And
And it's really fascinating also, this isn't about Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, but that's a massive movie for him, and probably the movie that's maybe best associated with him and has the biggest cultural impact.
Sure.
And he was making that for 20th Century Fox by 1970. But at this point, he was still making, sort of transgressive. Before this, he was king of, nudie cuties were his big thing, but he was moving into this sort of more gothic, transgressive mold. But it's funny because you mentioned the number one movie at the box office was The Sound of Music, which I personally love, but is kind of held up as like the last big American movie musical.
Sure.
Sort of like old-fashioned, very schmaltzy, very family-friendly entertainment.
Right.
But things were shifting so much that by 1970, a major studio would hire this fiercely independent, smut director.
Yeah, pretty much.
to helm the sequel to one of the biggest movies of all time, The Valley of the Dolls. And I didn't quite work out for everyone involved, but it's an interesting shift in just how Hollywood was working at that time.
Yeah. Do you want to give us a little bit, since I know you know a lot about him, do you want to give us maybe a little bit of kind of background on who Russ Meyer is and maybe how he got started? Because again, I only know so much of this anyway, but I'd love to kind of hear like what you know about that.
Sure. So Russ Meyer is, for those who only know him, for those not super well versed with him, he's frequently called the king of the sex film, which is not super accurate. He started in nudie cuties, like I said. He would do cheesecake photo shoots for things like Playboy early on. He actually got started in filmmaking because his mother pawned her wedding ring to buy him his first 8mm camera.
Yep.
Became a U.S. Army combat photographer during World War II. And, he made a lot of relationships with other soldiers during that time who he would usually put many of his friends from that time on production teams on his films. Post-war, he worked on industrial films. Like I said, one of my other main dudes, George Romero. It's funny. There's a lot of crossover with like a lot of other filmmakers I like with Russ Meyer, which I'll talk about a bit. But after industrial films, he found his way into shooting Cheesecake, like I said, shot some early Playboy shoots. Kind of cool. He would go on to shoot 3 Playboy centerfolds during the magazine's early years, including one of his then wife, Eve Meyer. His first film was The Immoral Mr. Tease, which was a hit on the Indian exploitation circuit. And that's the one that earned him the moniker King of the Nudies. And the film was groundbreaking and is, considered the first pornographic feature not confined to, sort of sleazy under-the-counter distribution. And the film was massively commercially successful. And it's funny because Meyer always sort of lived in the shadow of what he created. He's considered like sort of the king of the modern American sex film, but his films are always very soft core, sort of cheesy and sophomoric. He had no interest in where pornography eventually went. And it's funny because the adult film industry is, like you mentioned, the 80s VHS boom eventually outpaced him with hardcore pornography made cheaply for the VHS market. And he had no interest in that. And that's sort of when he was, in his biggest, direst financial straits because audiences weren't showing up for softcore anymore.
Right, because you could get it at home. You could get harder stuff, at home pretty easily. You could just go to an adult store that they had more of at the time. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, his biggest successes were Vixen was the first film to be given an X rating for its sex scenes and was a huge financial success. I think that was in... What year was that?
That was like 1960. What? God, it would have been. Was it before Faster Pussycat or was it after?
It was.
Erica
after.
Gavin is in Faster. She's in Beyond the Valley. So
yes.
Yeah.
She is. So it's a 1968 film.
Yeah.
I wonder. So, and that's interesting because, Deep Throat in 1972 is sort of considered like the big sex movie that, you could bring your girlfriend to. And like, it was like a box office draw for couples.
Sure.
But Vixen was sort of the first movie to do that, where it was like, oh, this is a movie that, normal people in suburbs can go see this dirty movie and enjoy themselves and not feel bad about it. And that's the movie that directly got him to do Beyond the Valley of the Dolls for 20th Century Fox.
Yeah.
Roger Ebert's only screenwriting credit,
I think so. One of them. Yep.
And he owned the rights of nearly all of his films and spent the majority of the 1980s and 90s making millions reselling them on the home video and DVD market.
Correct.
And eventually diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2000s, died in 2004 at 82. Yeah, he's just a fascinating filmmaker. The ultimate auteur, writing, editing, producing, directing, running his own camera. And what I always love is that he expresses, what his cinema is he's quoted as saying, "I have my fantasies, I put them on film." Um, and that's basically what you're getting here. He was obviously a massive breast man. That was his biggest thing. He had a huge fetish for it. And it is funny because Faster Pussycat and Beyond the Valley of the Dolls are his most famous films, but they're also not necessarily the most indicative of what you get if you look at his broader filmography. But we'll talk some more about that, I'm sure, as we go on.
Yeah. What I think is also really interesting, too, about Russ Meyer is that, as you stated, like, he wasn't doing maybe well financially as time went on because of just the decline in the changing nature of, like, video consumption and movie consumption. But what's interesting is that apparently a lot of the women in these movies kind of rallied around him near the end of his life and really helped him. And I think that really kind of shows something with Russ Meyer is that people could really probably say that he is like objectifying women or he is somehow misogynist because of this or whatever it is. I actually feel the opposite about him. I feel like he really does love women and he wants to show women in a different light, a strong light. And I think it just goes to show that if that is true, that a lot of these women he had in his films came together for him to help care for him in the end of his life and to be there for him. I just think that's like really awesome and a testament to just, the kind of environment he maybe made or the kind of relationship he was able to cultivate with his actresses. And it kind of warms my little heart in a very weird way. Because that's what filmmaking is. That's what a lot of this is it's trying to make cool art. It's trying to make something cool. And just the fact that someone like that, it's something different than you would think. It's the John Waters of it. People must think he's like crazy and weird, but like, no, he's just some like weird, he's like your weird uncle from Baltimore. You know what I mean?
It is that. And that's the interesting tension with Russ Meyer is especially like if we're talking about a generation discovering him today, there is a weird tension between what he's producing and sort of the leering gaze and the sort of feminist adoption of his vision, if that makes sense.
Totally, yeah.
He was a very patriotic, all-American, kind of conservative meat and potatoes dude. And I like that Jimmy McDonough, there's a quote, he says, Meyer spoke loudly to post-war males, made both anxious and hungry by the chaos of the sexual revolution. He was one of them, albeit slightly demented. He had crazy, insane lust for his female ideals, yet he was disinterested and disturbed at what actually lurked inside that flesh. So he is obsessed with the feminine form. And I think that's what we've talked about this, like I said, on the Lady Killers about how Quentin Tarantino is very indebted to how Russ Meyer approaches photographing women, especially with Death Proof. It is a gaze. We talk about the male gaze, but it is not salacious. It is more of a worshipful gaze. He photographs women from below like they're 50-foot Amazons and that like they could crush him at any moment. And it's also important to state that, he was a problematic guy, of course. He was it was a time when filmmakers were quirky and strange and, had this warts and all, we're warts and all people and difficult people to work with. But, he never slept with any of his actresses. He married a couple of them, but it wasn't a casting couch thing. He took women with, they like to say his women are impossibly built. He took women from difficult backgrounds. Tura Satana, we'll talk about some of that later.
Sure.
And photographed them like they were goddesses and sort of made friends for life of them with them. And it's really interesting. It's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, totally. And we'll talk more about the legacy near the end, but like, it doesn't surprise me that whether intrinsically or very explicitly, he's gone on to influence a lot of different filmmakers. And I just think that's really cool. But but
And it
Go ahead,
can't,
sorry.
and it also just can't be overstated that the women in his films, regardless of what they're going to, are the primary drivers of plot. They are,
Yes.
he liked to say, beyond women. They are super powered almost and supernatural, and the men are largely drooling buffoons.
Yeah.
And there's an inherent sort of proto-feminism in what he's doing. It's not very nuanced,
Right.
but it
Exactly.
is there.
Exactly. So I guess if we've gotten this far into our episode, before we get into maybe the development of like Faster Pussycat as a movie, Rocco, I have a bit of a task for you.
Okay.
Maybe if you were to have to explain maybe what this movie is about to somebody who's never seen it before, how would you kind of like elevator pitch this movie to maybe somebody who's just never heard of it or seen it ever? I would just like to hear what you have to say about that.
I would say 3 bisexual go-go dancers go on a murder rampage, and that John Waters has often said that this is the best movie ever made or will be made in the future.
Agreed.
And I think that's enough to sell it.
I think so too. Like it really is about like these women who they like fast cars, they like shaking their asses, and they be killing some people, man, and
They don't give a fuck.
They don't give a fuck. It's great. Yeah. But Faster Pussycat, actually, a little bit about this. So it was a follow-up to an earlier movie that he had done. I don't know if you know anything about the Motorcycle movie, but that was with 3 men, of course. But he pretty much thought like, oh, I guess maybe try to do this with some women. And that, I guess, was sort of the inception of this. But do you have any other information about maybe Motorcycle or maybe how Faster Pussycat came to be a film?
Yeah. My thoughts on Motorcycle, my memories of Motorcycle are hazy, but I have always been drawn to exploitation as well.
Right.
As a theater kid, I love Tennessee Williams, and that's just sort of elevated exploitation.
Yeah.
So this kind of capped off I like to call it his hillbilly gothic era, after Mudhoney and Motorcycle, and just sort of how we talked about Hollywood transitioning. He kicked off the Nudie Cuties, right? But the unfortunate thing is that Nudie Cuties also gave way to Roughies, which were also very sexualized black and white movies made for cheaply, but it was a lot about women being beaten and abused by men. And this is where you see a big divergence from that, because his whole idea was, I've been making movies about women getting beat up by men. Let's have the women kick the shit out of the men instead, because that was a novel idea at the time.
Right, exactly.
So it's not only, it comes from a mercenary place. Let's show people something they've never seen before, but it kicks off the entire rest of his filmography, where it's less about women, getting crushed by men and men getting completely destroyed by women, which is much more interesting and always is, regardless of the genre.
Totally. So yeah, a little bit about Faster Pussycat. This was released August 6th of 1965, and it runs 83 minutes. It had an estimated budget for about $45,000, which I'm sure probably was self-financed from Mr. Meyer, because he distributed it using RM Films International, which is his own kind of flagship film distribution place. This has no box office because I assume that this did not have a wide release. I would think so. But of course, it was shown in probably repertory theaters, or would end up in those kind of smaller theaters, which would then end up becoming grindhouses, I'm sure. I don't know if they were at the time, but definitely probably would end up being grindhouse theaters. On Rotten Tomatoes, again, getting into the critic stuff, because I do have a critic here. We have a 75% on Rotten Tomatoes, with 32 reviews from Rotten Critics.
So low. Are you fucking kidding me?
Speaking as a tomato approved critic yourself, so fucking low. What the hell?
That is bullshit.
And then audience score of 78% with about 5,000 ratings. And
also,
then
if 78%, audiences. if you log, sorry, I'm just like, if you logged on to rate Faster Pussycat Kill Kill and you are part of that 78% audience rating that is that low, like, you should be ashamed of yourself.
Right. And then a 3.6 out of 5 from Letterboxd, the voice of the people. So it's gotten a little more love there, if anything. We already talked about Russ Meyer and gave him a little bit of a backstory, but the writers of this movie, of course, Russ Meyer did do the story of this, but the screenplay, because he wasn't a screenwriter, was done by Jack Moran. Jack Moran did the movie Up, which was that also a Russ Russ Meyer movie as well?
Yes, not to be confused with the Disney Up, but it is a later one. It's
the Cardi B music video.
Yeah, it's the Up with the exclamation point and the lettering that kind of looks like a dick.
Yeah, something like that. And then Common Law Cabin as well. He also wrote that. The composer of this is a duo of Paul Sawtelle and Bert Schefter. They also did Motorcycle, which makes sense. They did that movie, but they also did the music for the original movie of The Fly from 1958, which would then get remade.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, which would get remade obviously in the 80s with Jeff Goldblum by Cronenberg. But yeah, and then cinematographer was Walter Schenk. I assume that he might have been a friend of Russ Meyer, perhaps. He did Mudhoney the same year and also The Black Cat, but I'm sure he also did some other stuff for Mr. Russ Meyer as well. And then, of course, the editor is Russ Meyer, which he's the director, obviously, and a bunch of other things. But he did like Super Vixens, Up, a lot of his own movies he edited, so it makes a lot of sense. Do you have anybody else in the crew that you wanted to shout out before we move into these fabulous, fabulous people?
I think we're good. I mean, it's all about the ladies. So and Russ would agree. So go on. Soldier on.
Yes. So we have our trio here. We have Tura Satana, as you stated, as Varla. She had also been in Irma LaDouche. How do you say this? Oh my god.
Irma LaDouche.
The douche.
Billy Wilder's Irma LaDouche, which I think she was also maybe in a relationship with him as well as Elvis. You know, she was
all the things.
She was a hot tamale back then.
For those who may not know what this Irma movie is, this is the I think second movie after The Apartment had won the Best Picture Oscar. I think they also has Shirley MacLaine in it. Does it also have that other guy in it? I don't remember, but she is in here. She plays a sex worker, I think, in this film. So people would have known her for that. And then also the Astro Zombies, which honestly sounds right at my alley. I kind of love that. We then have Haji, as you mentioned. She plays, what's her name in this movie? I always forget. Rosie, yes, who is like kind of in love with Varla very much. The only other thing that I know her from, or that I found from her, is that she has been Beyond the Valley of the Dolls as well. But she was somebody who worked with Russ before, obviously. But
yeah, she was sort of one of his most consistent collaborators. Collaborators too much. She's not. It's mostly cameos and things. She's also in Super Vixens in the beginning. And this movie always makes me laugh because she's an actress of indistinct descent, but she was British and Filipino. But in this movie, she is vaguely Italian.
Something, you know,
Italian coded, which I think is really funny.
It's whatever she wanted to put on that day.
I think they make her say that Susan Bernard is like a soft drink, and she's like a softa drince. And I'm like, what Italian? That what sort of
what is this making sense of? No.
Yeah, this is not Italian.
Right. And then as you were speaking of, so we also have Lori Williams, who is Billy in this movie, who just, you know, whenever she's in water, she just loses her inhibitions. I love that for her. Lori Williams.
What little she already has.
Exactly. She was also in Viva Las Vegas, speaking of Elvis, and also the movie The Prize. And initially, Billy was actually supposed to be played by a Miss Jane Mansfield, Mariska's mama, but that ended up not working out because of her husband at the time. I think he pissed off Russ Meyer so bad that he pretty much like fired her before she was even hired, apparently. But I honestly would see Jane Mansfield in this. Like, I mean, Lori Williams is fantastic, but it makes enough sense that I could see Jane Mansfield doing this role as well, especially with those big tits she has.
You know, Jane was considered the poor man's Marilyn Monroe, but even she was a little too classy for this.
I don't care. I love her more than Marilyn. I love her more than Marilyn, honestly, but that's just me.
I mean, I might like what's the movie? Fuck. I might like The Girl Can't Help It more than pretty much any Marilyn movie, so I might be right there with you.
Does that just mean that we're poor, I guess? Oh, well, it's fine. Oh gosh. And then, as you mentioned already, Susan Bernard, who plays, God, what is her name in this? I do not remember people's names very well. Linda. Okay, yes. She's also just known as the girl, I guess, to a point. She has a fun backstory. So she is the daughter of the Bernard of Hollywood. For those who may not know who Bernard of Hollywood is, he was a very well-known photographer, not like Russ Meyer doing like Playboy centerfolds, but he was more of like he was a Hollywood photographer, so he would take photos of celebrities, I'm sure on sets as well. And this is his daughter, very well known. She
but
was
oh, go ahead.
Go
You
ahead.
were
Go
continuing
ahead.
with her.
No,
Oh,
continue.
I was just going to say, speaking of Playboy, she was Playboy's first Jewish playmate after.
Yes.
She was only 16 in this film, so that came later, but kind of a fun fact.
Yeah, fun little fact for that for sure. Also, she has the distinction. She was in The Killing Kind and also Necromancy, but I think a lot of people would know her, I guess, for this movie. But she would then go on to birth Joshua John Miller, who, if you don't know who that is, of course we know who that is. But he is the brother in Teen Witch. He is one of the little boys in River's Edge.
You
He's
are
also in
fucking
there.
kidding me. What the fuck?
Yeah, Joshua John Miller. That is his mother.
My
Yes.
mind is fucking blown. He just
Yes.
and he's gay and directed. Oh no, he wrote The Final Girls with his partner.
Yes.
Yep.
And he just released apparently really horrible movie, The Exorcism, earlier this year. But yes, but he's the brother in Teen Witch. He's in The River's Edge.
And then that makes her husband Jason Miller.
Yes,
No.
from Exorcist.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's I never knew that. That's wild.
You want me to blow your mind even more, Rocco, if you didn't already know this?
Go for it.
So you guys did Alice Sweet Alice on your show, right?
Yes.
You know the main woman in that, who is the mom of the girls and everything?
Yes.
That was Jason Miller's first wife.
Oh my God.
Yep. And you know who her son is?
Who?
Jason Patrick from The Lost Boys.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Like, it's ridiculous. If you ever also, fun little thing for any of you on YouTube, if you go look up the wonderful Adult Swim's little thing, Too Many Cooks from like the 2010s or whatever.
Yes.
She is also in that as well, because she is literally Linda Miller or whatever her name is. She's, if you remember this, it's a spoof on the like sitcom openings or whatever. There's a grandmother in the first part, and it's all their real names. And yes, Linda Miller, that is the bitch from Alice Sweet Alice.
That is fascinating. See, things like this always make me feel better because, if you wanted to make a go of it in Hollywood, you are not going to get the Jennifer Lawrence
100%.
overnight sensation story,
Right.
because everyone is related to somebody in Hollywood.
Seriously. And plus also, these are like small potatoes. I mean, like Jason Miller and his wife Linda at the time were theater people. Oh, I'm gonna also mention too, Linda Miller is also the daughter of Jackie Gleason from The Honeymooners.
So
So there you go. Like, what the
It's
fuck?
so insane.
It's
And
so-
all of these families go back to like the founding of like the
Some of them do.
settling of Hollywood.
Right. So it doesn't surprise me that someone like Susan Bernard, who we're talking about in this movie, like, yes, now people know Bernard's of Hollywood because if you live in LA, like, you know about that, I guess, apparently, or whatever. But it's all these fun things. But I like kind of pulling back, especially since like I just watched Alice Sweet Alice and I was just like, oh my God, that is that woman. But I knew her from like the Too Many Cooks little sketch. And I was like, I just found that out earlier this year too. But I was just like, wait a minute, that's Jason Patrick's mom. Like, what the? It's all connected somehow. Yeah. Shout out Joshua John Miller. I do like you in Teen Witch. You're ridiculous in that movie, and I love you for it. Did you make a good movie talking about your dad? I don't know. Did you see The Exorcism at all? I'm surprised you hadn't seen that yet.
I did see it. It's unfortunate because I think it starts really strong, but I've never seen a movie that feels more fucked with by a studio.
Sure.
It definitely feels like there's a strong movie in there, and knowing that he and his partner wrote The Final Girls, I can only imagine that what they initially intended with it was different than what made it to screen, because it's just bizarre. It's a broken movie.
Yeah, that's what I kind of gather, that people are like, oh no, it was cool at first, but then like it kind of just like loses steam. And again, maybe it's not that he isn't a talented person, I don't think, but it's just one of those things where you're like, wait, what is this? What are we doing? And it's obviously a deeply personal movie because of his, relationship with his father and how that would have been and all this kind of stuff. So
it just feels like he definitely didn't have final cut on it, and
probably not.
Coming down the road, we'll probably see what was intended
that's
at some point in the future, hopefully.
That's the hope. And also queer people do out here doing things. I love that for them.
Yeah, we celebrate
So
that.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Stuart Lancaster, as I stated earlier, made his film debut in Mudhoney in this movie as well. But he would then go on to be in one of his last roles, I think, was in Edward Scissorhands. I don't know who he is in that, but I guess he's there. And he's also in Batman Returns as well. This is obviously when he's older, and he was obviously old already, like in this movie. But it makes no sense.
I'm not sure he was that old. Let's see. Okay. You keep going. I'm going to do the math.
Do the math for me. And then also Paul Trenka, who plays the not vegetable son, I guess. I don't remember his name. He's only known for this movie. So that's really it. But yeah, do the math on me. And then, is there anybody else, like, while you're doing that, like, is there anybody else in the cast that you wanted to shout out? This is a small cast, but I mean,
yeah, it's teeny weeny. Okay. So 1965 minus 1920. As the old man, he was 45.
He was a rough 45 looking in this. Listen.
Yeah, that hair is really bad, but that is really funny to me that he's just the old man.
Yeah.
But yeah, nobody to shout out really here. Small cast, like you said, but
yeah.
Amazing cast. Laurie Williams is my personal favorite.
She's so good because she's just like, oh, it's such a gas.
And she was 18, which is insane to me.
That is crazy to me because she doesn't look it at all. The fact that her and Susan Bernard are similarly aged in this movie, I'm just like, what? Like,
yeah, really insane.
Me? Like, what is this?
Yeah, and Tura is the performance of the movie, but I think Laurie is like just so perfect. I'm always really drawn to the blonde sex pot character. Big Mae West fan. So,
of course.
The OG blonde sex pot. Sorry, Marilyn.
It's true.
Yeah. But yeah, she just makes every line a meal, and I really love that.
Yeah, totally. Do you have anything to kind of talk about in terms of like anything on filming or production or anything like that you wanted to kind of talk about or anything like that? I mean, obviously this is shot in like the deserts of California because why wouldn't it be? But yeah, anything you wanted to share from there that you may know about?
Yeah, so obviously, like you said, shot in the deserts of California. Really sort of fly-by-night production because Russ, coming from industrial movies, knew how to do things on the cheap. He was actually sort of a master at using natural light with reflectors, which is really interesting. You don't necessarily see that. It's funny because he's trying to get that Klieg light look without using any light, but he really does it. It's a very cold, bright, very exposed visual that he gets here, which I really think looks great and still holds up.
While you're looking at your notes, of course, there was also some friction between like Susan Bernard, who was 16 at the time, and also the director and co-star. I don't think she had to do a whole lot of acting when she acted scared, because apparently like she was just like scared of Tara Satana, which I would be too, girl, because she is intimidating.
Yeah, Laurie Williams said the same thing, like even being like one of the trio, she was like, oh, this is someone you don't fuck with.
Yeah. But it also makes sense for Tara because she was like raised in an internment camp in like the California whatever. Because again, a fun little fact for those who don't know, but America decided to take a bunch of Japanese people and just put them in internment camps in the 40s.
Yeah,
nice.
she had a really hard upbringing. She was heavily bullied because she was part Japanese, also Filipino, Scotch, Irish, and Native American. But she has talked about, when she was 9 years old. Do you know this?
No, I don't. What happened?
Okay, this is crazy. So when she was 9 years old, she was thrown in a van and raped by 5 men.
That's crazy.
The assailants were never prosecuted, but her father encouraged her to learn martial arts. So she was actually a green belt in Aikido and a black belt in karate.
Girl, she shows it off in this movie, honey.
And she also is a perfect Russ Meyer heroine because, like Russ Meyer, she has a, vim for, exaggeration. And she's very much about printing the legend, right? So she maintained, and I don't know how true this is, but that she tracked down and exacted physical revenge on each of her attackers.
Listen.
And she says, I made a vow to myself that I would someday get even with all of them. They never knew who I was until I told them.
A girl. I love it. She's Kill Bill in these bitches, honey. I love it.
We need her life story on
Hell yeah.
an adaptation of that. But yeah, and also she has said Jimmy McDonough, the biographer, has some excerpts from her still as yet unreleased autobiography, which I think is being handled by, I cannot quite remember, but what's the podcast? Oh yeah, Midnight Mass. With Michael Verratti, previous guest of your show.
Yes.
They just did an episode on
Beyond the
Valley of the Dolls with Anna Matronic, and the other guest is, I think, still working.
Tara Satana's old manager. Yeah.
Yes. She's the one who is handling all of her estate stuff, and is, I still think, trying to get her book out. So, but in that book, Jimmy McDonough has a lot of quotes that I guess he had access to when he was writing his book in 2008-ish. And she does say that obviously the root of Varla, this character, does come from her difficulties with men and that initial assault that she suffered back when she was 9. And I think that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think so too. Like, that's kind of insane to take your trauma and be able to turn something into it, and be able to take, like, to be able to come out on the other side with it. I think that's also why you have, like, even for as divisive as they can be, I think that's why people sometimes get a level of catharsis through a, like, sexual assault revenge film type of thing. It makes enough sense. They are divisive and triggering to some, but I also think, like, they do have a level of importance out there, and it's being able to do this, and not everyone could do that, I'm sure, but Tara was like, fuck you hoes, I'm gonna do it, like, and I love
and
it.
It's also interesting because all of Russ Meyer's leading ladies were strippers, sex workers.
Yes.
Came from difficult family lives. And as difficult as he was to work with, and as much as he butt heads with so many of his leading ladies, as you said, they rallied around him towards the end of his life. And he just sort of created a home for them where they were worshipped on screen in a way that no one else had ever worshipped them. And it's a strange miasma of trauma and kinkiness that, I'm not expressing myself as well as I want, but there's definitely something there.
Yeah, totally. And I got that information from that Midnight Mass episode of Beyond the Valley, because I think it was I don't think it was animatronic. I think it was the other, I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but Tara Satana's old manager and the owner of her estate right now. I think she even kind of mentioned that as well, because, again, Russ Meyer movie. So it makes enough sense that that would happen and everything. You already kind of talked about your favorite character in this. I mean, I think my favorite, God, I mean, I'm trying to think. Like, I do like Billy. It's unfortunate how she gets out of here. She gets stabbed in the back by Varla, but if anything, like, I just like how kind of open and free she is, and also how she is very much the I don't know. She is that person who is just going along with this because why not? But she actually doesn't really like being part of this little trio either. She wants to kind of break free and do her thing, but that doesn't happen, unfortunately. But I mean, truly, this is, Varla's movie, really. It's about these women, but, like, she's kind of like, you can't take your eyes off of her.
No.
Can't help but pay attention to her, which is just, really cool. And I think you do make a good point where, Varla's character, she is so strong and dominant. And I really do think, like, in this situation, you have something like, obviously, The Sound of Music being the highest grossing movie of the year because people like to be happy and smiley. But also, like, I think this just really, and, you can give me examples of maybe beforehand, but I think this kind of movie, for really better, I think, not better or worse, but I think this really kind of shaped and honestly did a lot for any sort of anti-heroes that are female in cinema moving forward. You can't help but notice that, like, Varla in this movie and these women in general, you wouldn't, I mean, John Waters has said it, like, you would not have a Divine if it wasn't for someone like Russ Meyer, doing this with these characters. Divine is a mix of fucking Varla and Jane Mansfield put into a 300-pound man's body. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like so cool. But yeah, no, I think like I try to keep it I try to get a little deep here sometimes. But I really do think like this is a character, and this is it's a perfect archetype. And I just don't know if there was a whole lot before that. You have Dracula's daughter, but that's different. You know what I mean? Like, you have Carlotta, obviously, as a vampire, but like this feels a little bit more honest and real in a way.
Absolutely. You did not see this sort of, we talk about this a lot on Lady Killers also, like femininity does not have to be soft and submissive and pliant. This is an aggressive, almost masculinized version of femininity, and you see that throughout his filmography. Varla is the template for every female antihero that came after her. He even sold this movie saying, he said it was the first movie where you see a woman kill a man with her bare hands. Like, that was scary to people at this time. And sort of also going back to the trauma of it all, if there is a central message in Russ Meyer, it's that, sexual combat between men and women is eternal. Like, I think Jimmy McDonough says it's about the cavernous abyss between the sexes that cannot be bridged except for brief moments of depraved need,
Right.
Charles Napier, who was in Super Vixen, said for Russ Meyer, sex is like a bowel movement. It's just sort of like something that needs to happen. Right. But these movies are about all the stuff in between, right? Like, and like I said, there is that sexual revolution aspect where it's like, this is his ode to violence in women. It's about women being able to be as nasty and as bad as men and fucking break your back like a walnut, and you have no power over that. And it's a reactionary view, but it's also a deeply empowering view that, like you're saying, has major reverberations all throughout cinema, because you just did not see women like this.
Yeah, you just didn't. And also what's cool about this too is that this is also before kind of the wave of, I think it's second wave feminism or whatever kind of women's lib. It's called women's lib, Greg. It means women can do whatever they want. But but it's before that second wave of that in the 70s. So for Russ Meyer to be doing this in the middle of the 60s, I just think is like really cool. And like, yeah, it's like pretty decent. And I don't know, like it's hard for me to like, yes, he probably had his own kind of issues or being a kind of weird conservative guy in the 60s perhaps, but it's hard for me to look at this movie and think that this guy is somehow like a misogynist. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like hard to think that, like, or that he doesn't love these women and he wants to show these women in a great light. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
That's the thing. And I think that's when we talk about the male gaze, we're frequently talking about, the objectification of women and actually sort of a disliking of women, making them less than. Russ Meyer is the complete opposite. He knows he is nothing in the hands of a strong woman. As a red-blooded American heterosexual man, he is obsessed with women and knows that he has no power in these relationships. And that can be an ugly thing, an incel thing like we're seeing today.
Sure.
Or it can be something he is in awe of, and he stares agog at these women.
Yeah.
And I urge anyone who is, if Faster Pussycat is your first Russ Meyer movie, continue on, because they just become bigger and more cartoonish and more insane. And like, he has a breast fetish. It becomes grotesque by the end of his life. Like, sometimes the breasts in these movies start to become almost monstrous. We were talking about the substance at one point earlier before we started. It becomes like substance levels of crazy.
It does.
But you never get the sense that he dislikes women or is a misogynist. And it's funny because there's something to offend everybody in his movies. And it is funny also because this one is scripted by someone else. As you get into his further filmography, the ones that are scripted by him are full of all sorts of crazy philosophizing and narration about like feminism and America. And it's a strange brew of things, but it comes off as satire more often than it doesn't. Vixen, for example, is about prejudice and but it's also an anti-communist movie.
Right.
he is. It's a dialectic thing. Everyone is many things at once, and yeah. I'm petering out here, but it's just
no, you're fine. I'm trying to
I'm
trying to keep us on our toes, obviously, but yeah, because I just think like once we wrap up, we could talk about how fabulous this movie is. But obviously, I see what you're saying, though, for sure.
One last thing. He also was raised with a very absent father.
Yes.
And his mother was a very strong presence in his life. Jimmy McDonough's book actually opens with him visiting his mother's grave. And he did that a lot up until he could no longer do that. So he also had a sister, Lucinda, who was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. So he was very deferential and reverent to the women in his life personally, in a way that really undercuts any sort of misogyny that you might expect.
Yeah, I agree. And I can totally I can understand that as somebody who was raised by a single mom and also has an older sister. Like anything like that kind of shit, like will always kind of get with me because I'm just like, hell yeah. Like, you know, and I love that. Yeah. In terms of any of the scenes in this movie, I know we do want to talk a little bit about like what is some of your favorite scenes of this film that you kind of stand out to you and you want to talk about a little bit?
Oh my God. So, I mean, I love a dinner scene. I mean, it is lunch, but I love a backwoods, dramatically fraught dinner scene. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is my favorite horror movie of all time. So, you know, that's the ultimate dinner scene. And just my favorite Billy in there. She has some real humdinger lines. My favorite is always, Mr. Host, I'm old enough for whiskey, votin', and lovin'. Now the next election's 2 years away, and my love life ain't getting much better. So how about some of that good 100%?
It's like so weird.
She's fantastic.
But I love it.
And then I love that she also goes, Varla says something about friends, and she goes, Varla, I'd rather make them than kill them any day. Old showbiz saying.
Oh my God, it's ridiculous. Yeah, I would say that dinner scene is definitely something to behold because they are just eating chicken and like, you know, corn and some potatoes here and there. Like it's a whole thing. And it's funny. I was saying we just did Night of the Demons last week with my buddy Pickens, and I said like, oh yeah, we're doing Faster Pussycat this week, and he even mentioned that it's like kind of a reverse Texas Chainsaw, kind of.
Sure.
Like or something. He said something about it, whatever he said last week, but like. Yeah, I mean, sure. Now that I've watched it, I'm like, yeah, it's these women coming on this property and they're, you know, really, at the end of the day, Texas Chainsaw is just about Leatherface trying to protect his house by these strangers who are just coming on there, you know, like.
I also love that scene because, you know, it is the women's movie, but Stuart Lancaster as the old man is fantastic. And he's just holding court in that scene. And it's so good.
It's so good. Yeah, it's ridiculous and crazy. And then I think also like for me, I do love when they're getting like they're at the little car service place like before they head into the house and like the guy is like helping to like wash their cars and like fill up their tanks and stuff like that.
Yes.
And I love how Marla says like this guy's talking to her, da, 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 da. And then he's just like looking at her tits and she's just like, well, you won't find him down there, Columbus. Like
apparently,
so funny.
Apparently she improvised that line. So he was open to some improvisation. And that's Mickey Fox, who is in quite a few Russ Meyer movies as well.
Makes enough sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any other favorite scenes?
Gosh, I do love the end because this movie is fucking wild. So for the end, because me hasn't seen this, like the end is where Billy's been killed, Haji has been killed, Rosie has been killed. The old man has been run over and his money's been taken, okay, because he was keeping his insurance money in his like wheelchair or whatever.
Your old man's been blasted out of his wheels.
Yeah. And then the vegetable I think is dead too because a very long scene where Varla's trying to run him over. It's ridiculous, but he's like fending it off with his muscles. Side note before I talk about the end, Russ Meyer may have loved titties like any good red-blooded American and any person does, but I do also love that he does throw in a little something for the men, and I don't think he realized that because that vegetable's hot, man. Like,
oh yeah,
beefcaking, like, you know, it makes enough sense where I'm just like, and I don't know about his other movies necessarily, but like, you know, for somebody to, I don't really. You know, it's funny. I own Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, but I haven't watched it yet. because I will at some point.
Oh
But
God, you're in for a treat.
I bet. But I will also say that, like, I don't think he was afraid to necessarily obviously use women's sexuality and their bodies to, like, do his thing, but like also like he wasn't afraid to maybe, show men's gaze a little bit. You know what I mean? Like to show men's bodies in a way. I don't really know if he did that in his other movies, but I think he also kind of did that in here a little bit, which is just fascinating to me.
Well, and we really haven't even talked about, queer audiences responding to these movies. I mean, every single one of his women is a drag queen.
Oh, 100%. Like, it's crazy. Like,
yeah. You talked about Divine, like, even Divine, John Waters always says, like, Divine shouting every line in his movies is Tura Satana. Yeah, it's a style that was directly picked up. And you see that in drag still today in ways that people aren't, privy to. But yeah, and it's also funny. Yes. So he does photograph the vegetable as beautifully as he does the rest of the women in the film. And yeah, I think he was just interested in outsized, amazing physical forms, and it did not matter if they were possessed by women or men.
Yeah, no, totally. I I agree with that for sure. And what's interesting too is that, he is coming, I think also him being a veteran is really interesting too, because the thing is that he's coming off of this and coming back into civilian life, and he was able to find something that worked for him, which does not always happen with veterans, especially nowadays. There's plenty of veterans who end up impoverished or homeless or any of these things, because even though we want to send people to, to war, and we want to do that, when they come home, we don't always have the best resources for them, especially when they don't stay in the military, perhaps. You can't stay on base if you're a veteran because you're not actively there anymore. So anyway, but it is one of those things where I think it's interesting that, like, I'm sure a lot of men who came from the service too, why do you think a bunch of them maybe ended up in like beefcake modeling and that kind of shit? It's not that surprising, because you were made to, you have to lose weight and be in shape to be in the military, period. Literally. And what the hell else do you do when all you kind of have is like, okay, I guess I can't kill people because that's against the law, but I've been told to do that because I'm fighting war and I have to be tactical about this. Sure, if some gay guy's gonna give me money to like take my shirt off and like take some photos for him, great, whatever. It doesn't surprise me that like he also then ended up like doing that. And I don't know what I'm talking about here.
No,
I just think it's like it's there. Like it doesn't surprise me. Like,
and that's a really interesting point, because he was just sort of following his cinema is an outsider cinema, even if it is a bit conservative in its construction and its opinions, right? Because, like I said, he was working with sex workers and strippers. The beefcake, like you were just saying, soldiers down on their luck, things like that. There's trans elements that are obviously problematic in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, because homosexuality, queerness was criminalized during this time. Animatronic brought this up on the episode of Midnight Mass very eloquently. And this movie has some lesbian elements that are there for shock value, of course, but in 1965, that was a big no-go. He didn't even tell the cast that they were playing that. Rosie, played by Haji, she's crying. Apparently, he only told her when she was crying when she's outside, while Tura Satana is hooking up with Paul Trinka, and she was like, I don't understand why I'm crying. She's a big sister to me. Why am I doing this? That's how she had been playing it. And he sort of revealed that there was a lesbian subtext, which is very clear once you know it. I mean, before you even are told it, you see it. And they were sort of shocked by that. But in the same way that obviously this is an exploitation film and those things were thrown in there to shock people, it's how gay and queer audiences find it, right? Before we had the representation that we have today. That's my favorite sort of, queer cult classics, is stuff that is not inherently queer in and of itself necessarily, or, good representation, but stuff that we gravitated towards because we had nothing else. That's my favorite kind of thing.
Totally. Yeah. And I think also like with the ending of this movie, because you have like Varla, who is now like, what is the brother's name? Not the
Kirk.
vegetable. Kirk.
Kirk.
Yeah. So him and Tina, I guess her name is, whatever.
Linda.
Linda, whatever her name is. They're like at the end, and like you end up getting Varla taken down and killed because she is kind of this like force that is won't be stopped and has to be taken down in a way. And then you have this like weird ending where they end up getting away, and like, okay, cool, I guess. But if anything, like it is just this interesting, I don't know, she's not like Godzilla's monster, but she kind of is a little bit. Like she just won't be stopped. Like, and but it's for good reason, because she is like, I don't know, she's chosen this life of debauchery and crime or whatever. I don't know.
That's a great analogy though, because like who watches Godzilla for the love story at its center and the human characters? You literally fucking don't. And the series became about Godzilla. It's the same thing here. Like you have, the typical lover characters who are good, quote unquote, good people, but you're disinterested in them as a viewer, and I think Russ Meyer is disinterested in them as a filmmaker.
Totally. I agree with that for sure. And I think like, I think in terms of scenes and all that, like those are like the big ones that kind of, this is only like an hour and 20 something minutes. It's not that long. So there's only so much to talk about with it. I do kind of want to talk a little bit about just like obviously we were talking about how like the box office and the critical response of this was not really, when it first came out, it was not really taken seriously at all. It was a box office failure, and it was just kind of seen as like, this is a really bad script. This Mudhoney movie is also really bad, and it's a skin flick, so people didn't really take they didn't take it as seriously as people would then reevaluate it with. So that then primes it to then be something where you can find it on, if it releases on home video or it goes into a grindhouse or any of these things. Do you have anything to kind of talk about in regards to the legacy this movie has had and kind of its impacts in film, as we start to wind down and we start to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. John Waters, he credits himself with giving Faster Pussycat a big boost. But I think a lot of people know it because the Cramps started making references to it. I'm not a big music person, so I don't know everything about that, but I know that by the 90s, Russ Meyer was saying, oh, people know about this movie now because the Cramps referenced it. So it definitely had legs, and that's what makes it an ultimate cult movie. We want to label everything cult movies nowadays.
Sure.
Just because it has a smaller fan base, but a real cult movie is something that was not successful and was kept alive by people, especially back when films would just disappear, like,
which this did, I'm sure.
Yeah, you would never see this again. I mean, even Rob Zombie, one of my other guys, director I love, I found that he did a Turner Classic Movies intro for this on YouTube. So it is something that has stood the test of time. Like you talked about, it definitely is an influence for all female antiheroes going forward.
Agreed. Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I have much more than that, but
I think like in this situation, this movie really, it just has this like, it has this legacy, I think, because no matter what, people want to see something that's a little different, off the beaten path, if you will. And women behaving badly is something that was kind of niche, and that is why movies like this one or Switchblade Sisters or, any of these other films that kind of show women not behaving the way they're supposed to, it always is going to have an audience, because why wouldn't it? Like, you want to see something that's a little different, which is always really cool. Yeah.
And I also like that Jimmy McDonough in his biography talks about how the world of Russ Meyer is a self-contained world, but one that's like as good as anything by Dave. Like it's a world that he created that plays by its own rules and has its own archetypes like David Cronenberg or a Martin
Mhm.
Scorsese or a David Lynch. He is so singularly his own thing. And, when Grindhouse was coming out, Quentin Tarantino often talked about how, the Grindhouse movies never gave you what they promised in the
Mhm.
trailer. But this is a rare movie that I think is, as a B movie, it completely delivers on all fronts. It is the ultimate cult item, like you said.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also, like, I was talking about that. I was thinking about that a little earlier, where I was just like, Russ Meyer is that person who he is the auteur, like you were talking about. People look at John Waters and they know, like, when you think of a John Waters movie, kind of you're getting into. People use Lynchian as an adjective for David Lynch's films,
Mhm.
because this, and there's Quentin Tarantino obviously has that too, but fun through line that at least two of those people have is that they are influenced by Russ Meyer. And what's interesting too, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but I mean, I did an episode on here about Carnival of Souls from 1961, I believe,
Mhm. Mhm.
or 62. And it's funny to me that Herc Harvey and Russ Meyer, they're different people, obviously, because Herc Harvey only ever did that one movie, really. But it's interesting how they both came from industrials,
Yeah.
how they both, like, obviously Russ Meyer was using the deserts of California to shoot at least this movie, and then other movies he obviously just shot in California. And then for Carnival of Souls, Herc Harvey used Utah to kind of do this, and used this particular building for that, which is interesting. But I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
It is super interesting just looking at filmmakers of this era. We've talked
Mhm.
about on the Lady Killers, like everyone also started off in pornography. So
Yes.
Abel Ferrara,
Wes
yes,
Craven,
Wes
Sean S.
Craven.
Cunningham. Like,
So, like you're talking about, coming out of this post-war era, they're coming into this economic boom that's going on in
mhm.
the US, and
Yep.
they're trying to leverage skills. And a lot of them started in industrials and sex
Yep.
films. And Russ, it's funny because he stayed in the sex films.
Yes, he
Like
did.
he was content continuing doing his own thing. He had his brief dalliance with mainstream success with 20th Century Fox,
Right.
but he was like, I like what I'm doing and I'm going to keep doing this. And
Yeah.
the industrial thing can't be overstated. He's really famous for a machine gun editing style. Like,
Right.
your mind is going to be blown when you start watching Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, because the cuts are insane.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
he had this belief that films should move like freight trains, and it just gets more exaggerated as it goes on.
Mhm.
So there's even a critic who I think said that he photographs women like Chevys, like human Chevys. So, that whole industrial thing does sort of feed into what he was doing, and his approach to this sort of like exuberant, glossy American excess, that he really captured as the way that he shot things. John
Yeah.
Waters often calls him the Eisenstein of sex films, which I think is very correct.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree. And I think also, like, this movie, if anything, like, I always kind of think about, why does this movie have this legacy? Why is this? And I really do think, like, this is the beginning of this kind of filmmaking, or this kind of archetype of the monstrous femme in a weird way. Or it feels,
Mhm.
it's not like fucking Bride of Frankenstein, but, like, who's fabulous, of course, but it's like, it's this thing of, like, Russ Meyer started something really cool and has a really cool movie with this, but it really just shows that, like, like we were talking about earlier, like, he really did love doing this. He loved photographing women this way. He loved being able to create these kind of weird stories, and, showing women being powerful, being, taking no shit from anybody. And, I don't know if he was meaning to do that. I don't know if he was meaning to, like, create this kind of, like, crazy feminine anti-hero archetype, but, like, he really helped with that. And, like I said, whether implicitly or explicitly, any filmmaker who wants to, do anything with monstrous femmes, or who wants to do a woman behaving badly type of movie has Russ Meyer to thank. And he's a
Yeah.
big part of that. And it's just, he obviously was passionate in what he wanted to do, and I think he exactly got what he wanted. And I'm always big on that. I'm always big on just like, if I can see what you were doing, or if I can see the passion behind what you were doing, I'm gonna like you more than some hack who can make a big film and maybe get a lot of money, but like isn't really all that interesting. Chris
And he and he made a ton of money. Like at one
Yeah.
point, I think I read like he had 3 or 4 films in Variety's like most profitable films of all
Yeah.
time, and he did it entirely by just flying his own freak flag and not really.
Mhm.
Even the 20th Century Fox film, that is so thoroughly bizarre and bizarrely his own vision. Like you never see like a big studio film that feels so of a piece of, what an independent filmmaker auteur like him has been doing. So, and just speaking of the monstrous feminine of it all, Leave Her to Heaven is a big 1945.
So
Have you seen it with Gene Tierney? Yeah.
I just watched it.
Really? First time?
Yeah, I had only ever heard of it. I
good.
tried watching it a couple months ago. It was like on some streaming service, but I heard you guys mention it on Jawbreakers episode you did, and
Oh yeah, I
was like,
did, didn't I?
yeah, you mentioned it because Courtney Shane is supposed to be, Rose McGowan. She used Gene Tierney's character a little bit differently. She's quoted as saying like, "Oh, it's like somebody being pushed off a mountain." I was like, nobody gets pushed off a mountain in that movie, girl. But
she didn't remember.
She didn't remember, but it's very well known. But like, fucking Gene Tierney is wild in that movie, but it was really good though.
But like, that's one of the rare examples, right? Before this, where you get to see a woman, like you said, behaving badly and sort of walking away with the movie. And
agreed, yeah.
And here it's just like they are something I think is very interesting about him is like his women are behaving badly, but they are excessively feminine.
Yeah.
Like we said, literally monstrously feminine. Like Laurie Williams' hourglass figure is so amazing, but also totally bizarre.
Right.
Like he cast these women for their assets and for their builds, and was very interested in this is funny, natural breasts. Like most of his films,
right,
up to towards the 80s, he did cast some like augmented women, but really he was looking for women with the biggest boobs he could find. He called himself Magellan in that way, like always looking for bigger and bigger breasts.
Yes,
he would even sometimes cast women in their like early pregnancies because I guess that helped.
Makes your boobs bigger.
Yes. But the monstrous feminine is really like, you can see that he created this archetype of womanhood that even feeds into what pop stars are now.
Yeah.
And his women are as distinctive as sort of Hitchcock blondes. They're their own thing unto themselves. And I don't think he gets the credit he deserves, mostly simply, like I said, because unlike, you mentioned things being Lynchian or Hitchcockian earlier, his stuff is sort of out of circulation, and it has this reputation as being smutty sex films when it's kind of like the sex is the least interesting part ultimately.
100%, right. There's something different going on. And like I completely agree with that. And I just think this movie has been able to have the legacy because people like it, and it's something that is so wholly different than what you've seen. So much so that I mean, like, I don't know if I'd ever want to see this get remade. I don't think it could be remade.
Oh no.
I'm cool with maybe having Death Proof be the closest thing to something like that. Because now that I've seen this and that, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I see what he's doing, obviously. But like, that's the closest I'd want to get, because I don't think you can make a movie like this again. That's just like this is out of pocket and wild. But like, I just think like, yeah, this movie is fucking rad. And if you haven't seen it, like, I just think you need to check it out. And it's something where, it's not a William Masher fucking Teen Beach movie, I guess. Right. But but it also is like wild in its own way, like how those movies are like colorful and wild in their own ways. And it's just interesting how, you could do something like this. And it's so crazy just to think of how much Russ Meyer has influenced so many other filmmakers. I mean, you talk about Rob Zombie, like there wouldn't be Rob Zombie movies if it wasn't for Russ Meyer. And I think he even tell you that. Like,
yes, and this is me getting on my soapbox because I fucking love Sherry Moon Zombie. I think she is captivating to watch. Maybe early on, maybe, in House of a Thousand Corpses,
Right.
a little rough around the edges, but in the same way that Turrisatana is not a believable actress, right?
No, 100% no.
But this is a performance in big capital letters, underlined, and I love that. Sometimes that's what I come to for movies. I am sometimes more interested in somebody who can give a performance that is indelible and unforgettable, more so than somebody who is, portraying believable emotions on screen. And I see that in Sherry Moon. I'm sorry, I really do.
No, I get it. And also, obviously, like, not that Turrisatana was with Russ Meyer at the time, but like, obviously, like, Rob Zombie is somebody who he wants to, show this kind of life, exploitation, like you were talking about a little earlier. That's very much Rob Zombie's kind of MO in some of his movies.
Yes, and also the Quentin Tarantino thing is so interesting just because his movies are largely sexless as well. Sexless. I think the only sex scene I can think of is in Jackie Brown, and it's kind of a joke.
Right.
But he gets some flack for, being a footman, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he also gets what Russ Meyer got, and there's nothing wrong with looking and being turned on by something as long as it's in a loving, worshipful way, And I don't think he gets much credit for that. He never portrays women in like a skeezy way.
Agreed. Yeah. And I just think this movie is so awesome. Again, it's on YouTube. You can find it if you want to watch it. But I really do think like this is a really penultimate cult movie. It will still keep going, and I'm just very happy to have finally seen it, be able to chop it up with you about it. I think this makes a great double feature with this, and also I would shout out Switchblade Sisters. I think makes a really good double feature with this too.
Love it. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. Like
another Quentin Tarantino favorite.
It's so good, but because it's two different things. This is about these three women, going out and being bad, and murdering a guy at least once. But then you have gang warfare and Switchblade Sisters. Like it's a whole thing, like a very exploitation, like, and we love an exploitation film over here. So I definitely think so. But I think that's kind of all we can really say about Faster Pussycat. This movie's fucking rad. It's awesome. Like, go check it out, like, for sure. Do you have any other closing thoughts that you can think of, Rocco, before we start to sign away?
Not really. I will say, though, you just mentioned we love exploitation here. Russ Meyer has said that every film is an exploitation film. Some people know what they're selling and some don't. And he always knew what he was selling. And if you like what he's selling here, you will love what he's selling elsewhere. So,
I can get into it.
Check out his filmography. When Severin puts these movies out, buy them, because that means that we're going to get more better versions of them.
Yeah.
And spread the gospel of Russ Meyer, because there's nothing like it.
Yeah. And I'm glad to have been able to finally cover at least one of his films. It makes me want to I own at least another one of his films, so I will have to pop that on at some point.
As soon as you fucking watch that movie, you're going to be like, God damn it, I need to talk to somebody about this immediately.
I do have a guest for the episode I want to do on it that is not you, Rocco.
That's fine. I'm just glad you're doing an episode on it, because it's magnificent.
At some point. I have to figure out what I want to do, because I want to do either Valley and then Beyond the Valley, either together with two separate guests, or we'll have to see. I don't know yet, but
And I love that shit, when a sequel is so completely diametrically opposed and
right,
like not a sequel in name only.
TCM2, for example.
Exactly. Yes, perfect. Yeah. But I love Valley of the Dolls and Beyond. Like, they're both fantastic.
Right. Yeah. But Rocco, I want to thank you so much for coming on my little show here. I mean, it's been so nice talking to you.
Yeah.
And I know
thanks.
You'll probably definitely be back for sure. Again, maybe House on Sorority Row. That'd be nice. But tell the people, if you want people to follow you and all that, tell people where they can find you on the internet if you want them to.
Yeah, listeners can always find me at Rocco T. Thompson on Twitter. I'm excessively thirsty there, male celebs, deeply obsessed. If that's your vibe, please follow me. You can also find me on Letterboxd at Rosemary's_Gaby, as well as Instagram, same handle. Listen to The Lady Killers, a Feminine Rage podcast. It is myself. I am the token boy, along with three lovely ladies, Jen Adams, May Schultz, and Sammy Kuykendall. We're on the Bloody Disgusting Podcast Network. We're coming up on a year. We will be at a year once this episode drops, so we're pretty thrilled about that. And yeah, that's all I've got. Oh yeah, read me in Rue Morgue magazine. Get a subscription. That's my longest running relationship. That's who I started writing with. A Canadian publication, but available everywhere. So
Yeah.
get up.
I love that. Love that. Yeah. And of course, you can, follow me on all the socials. You heard that in the beginning of the show. But yeah, I think that's all. But what are we doing next week? Well, Rocky, you won't be here, but I do have another fabulous guest coming on next week. We're going to switch gears a little bit from. And I told you about this movie, Rocco. We're going to switch gears a little bit from exploitation movie to maybe a little bit more of a schmaltzy movie, some people may say, but I fucking love this film. And it's also about a bunch of women. But we're going to be talking next week about a little film from 1989 called Steel Magnolias.
Nice.
Yes. I know you have not seen this yet, Rocco, and I need you to change that.
And I mean, I grew up in South Carolina. I don't really know how I missed it.
It's Louisiana. So, I mean, you can maybe appreciate some stuff.
Okay, but still, the South, like people were still obsessed.
Yeah, no, totally.
Oh, an interesting fact about that, to tie all this together is that one of the only actors that, mainstream Hollywood actors that Russ Meyer was interested in working with, guess who?
Was Dolly Parton because of her bust.
Exactly.
I would have loved that. Are you fucking kidding me? Oh, amazing. Why not? But it would have been amazing. But yeah, we're talking Steel Magnolias next week. I have a fabulous guest for that. We chopped it up real good about that. But I think that's everything. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. And remember,
see you in church, huh?
Take care. Bye.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes.